Thanks, Stacy, for helping. Okay, I think by now you know that Tony Head is our, or Anthony Lee Head is our
Tony works just fine.
Okay, Tony. Tony is our author today. And, you know, I was looking over your bio and I really think, usually I'm the one who reads this, but maybe you should, because it sounds so much like you. Or maybe just talk about yourself.
Okay, well, first, you know, thanks everybody for weathering the insanity of the internet to get on here, and thanks for inviting me. And how best to say this? I'm 73 years old, and I started writing late in life. In my late 60s, my first book came out when I was 70. Before that, I was an attorney and I was a teacher. I ran a martial arts training hall. But then in my mid 50s, my wife and I ran away from home and moved to Playa del Carmen, Mexico, where we ran a small bed and breakfast and a margarita bar a block from the Caribbean Sea. And we did that for 10 years. And then when we returned to the States, I decided that the people I had met and the stories I had heard were worth sharing. So I began to write my book, Driftwood, Stories from the Margarita Road. And in that book, I told and described the adventures of any number of people in the expat community. But the theme of the book was, what is the nature of home? Everyone I knew living in Mexico, every gringo I knew living in Mexico had run away from home trying to find a home, which I thought was an interesting, paradoxical journey. And so I became sort of infatuated with the idea of how we define home and how we go about looking for it or establishing it. And that became the focus of my book. And then one of those stories was picked by Sharyn to put into her wonderful anthology. And so that brings us here to what's next. And it was a perfect match, I thought, because part of the discussion of home that I hoped my book would generate was that home is not a rigid or everlasting concept. Home is something that changes in fact and in theory and in our perception. And so that's what I wanted to explore. So the idea that it's a matter of change, and the fact that Sharyn saw that perspective made me very happy. So that sort of brings us up until today.
Okay,
So
I think I'll add about your book that it was named as one of the Kirkus Review's best books of 2020. I think that's important for you and for your book. Did it have any other honors? I think I saw something about other.
It did, and thank you. If you want me to brag on myself, it's one of my favorite topics. Yes, Kirkus gave it a starred review and then named it one of the best independent publishing books of 2020. And I won the Benjamin Franklin Award for Best Book from the Independent Publishers Association. I received an award from a couple of London-based organizations. It's picked up some nice reviews and a couple of awards along the way. The best feedback I get about the book, though, is from reviews or from people sending me emails saying, it's really changed my view of what I can do with my life. I mean, so many of us, I think, get to our 40s or 50s and go, oh, this is all there is. I'm going to settle in and ride this ride. And the idea that we can make changes in how we live struck a lot of people, and that pleased me that the book had that sort of effect.
Okay, and change happens no matter what. So if it's better for them to decide what the change should be in some cases. I'd like to back up a little bit on this and just deal with some of the let's say the surface areas of the book, of the story.
Well, I was going to suggest, if you don't, I don't know if other authors who have joined the group have done short readings. I have a couple paragraphs that I thought, if people haven't had a chance, might put it in perspective. Would that be all right?
That's fine.
Okay. This is early on describing the community that's the foundation for my experiences and for the story that we're discussing. A small community of American expats was beginning to come together on this perfect little tropical beach. For some time now, people like me had been drifting south, ending up in Mexico with Jimmy Buffett songs playing in their heads. They left behind mortgages, failed marriages, and a lifetime of disappointments. Some came looking for a fresh start, and some went searching for a place to hide. A few were pulled by a dream they could never quite understand. As I got to know my new neighbors, I found them to be saints and sinners of every degree of good, bad, and strange. These aging adolescents thought of themselves as Peter Pan's lost children, and the beach was their neverland. Having run away from home, they were now refusing to grow up. They spent their days lying in the sun and their nights dancing on the sand. Every evening was an opportunity to break another commandment, and every morning offered a new chance at redemption. My newfound friends were lazy, profane, adventuresome, often drunk, and free. So that's the group of people that I was writing about, or the setting for this story.
That's a great passage. I really like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's much compressed into that, the Peter Pan generation. But also, you said earlier, the theme of looking for home is central to the piece, to this piece that I just read. And I think that's a universal theme. I had many thoughts as I was reading, and a couple of things I want to sort of grab a hold of. Both Sharyn and I are practicing Buddhists, and I'm in the Soto Zen tradition. She is Tibetan, but there is a very important reference to a Zen Buddhist in this excerpt that we read of the story. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about your background in Buddha Dharma.
I was ordained and received the precepts of Soto Zen Buddhism from Reb Anderson, who was or is the senior Dharma teacher at the San Francisco Zen Center. At one time, he was the central abbot. I've been a practitioner of Zen Buddhism probably for about 20 years now. It's a major part of my life, and it's an influence in what I write. As an author, I want to draw a fine line between preaching and between introduction. And that's what I tried to do here. And that's sort of the basis of the story that Sharyn picked for her book. The idea here, and for people who aren't Buddhists, a foundational belief or creed or core understanding is that all beings must be saved. All beings have a equal importance, and there is great literature through the ages expressing the idea that all beings isn't restricted to human beings. And so that was somewhat the idea of, I've been talking about home for all these people in my book, but what about the land, and what about the other beings, the non-human beings that are being affected by our search for home? What's it doing to their home? And so that was the start of this story. There's a couple of references to a Buddhist teacher throughout the book, and you can just assume that's Reb Anderson, who is still teaching. Reb is in his 80s, and I forget, he's having a birthday next month, but I forget how old, but he's a delightful teacher, and you can find him on the internet. But so yes, so my Buddhist beliefs are part of establishing this idea of searching for a home. At the same time, Buddhism tells us nothing lasts forever. All is impermanent. And so we're searching for something that's not going to last. And I found that in my own experience living on the beach in Mexico to just be manifested every day. You have the tide washing away last night's activities, sins, debauchery on the beach. You have the weather. We lived through a number of hurricanes down there. You have the passage of time and the passive movement of people in and out of the community. That sense of this is all on a continuing roll and nothing lasts forever is brought home much more to me every day in a third world life than it is in an industrial society. And so that's where I'm trying to slip the Buddha Dharma into my stories without being too heavy-handed about it.
Well, I think it's
You're not
very elegant. Oh, Sharyn, go ahead.
right. You're not. I don't think you're heavy-handed about it at all. It took me to read the story, which was interesting in itself. When you're talking about all creatures, all things on the earth, when I read part of this, I was thinking of indirectly of climate change, because you have here everything brought together. You have change, you have the climate destroying a community, you have the industrial coming in and changing the community. You have all of it compacted in those first few pages. And maybe we can pull apart some of that. First of all, there's the storm. The storm comes and wipes away everything that was known to this narrator. And his business, his livelihood, everything is gone. Then you have corruption. You have corrupt Mexicans, in this case, coming in and saying, pay up or get out. Now, that's part of the change that I'm seeing here.
It is, but I'm also, and you left one out. I also, and it's in terms of all of the list of things changing that I wanted to throw in there. I threw in that the hero of the story, the grouper, is trans. That groupers all start out as female and then are turned into males as required by nature. So I wanted to, that was a subtle statement about our changing perspectives about gender and sexual nature. But in terms of the corruption, you can't, and this is, I think, true of any concept of change. And this goes back to the Buddhist concept of there's never one source for anything. Corruption exists because there are people who benefit from it. And the corruption in Mexico is funded by American money. It is, there would be no corruption if there weren't people there willing to pay the bribes and put the money in secret bank accounts. Certainly, you can't excuse either the culture or the government of Mexico in sponsoring a society that's structured on corruption. It's always been that way. But that's a question of survivability. They do that because otherwise they're going to be overrun with the money and culture and people coming in to seize their homes. That's been their history. So the nasty Mexican building inspector who wants money to let you continue to have your business is not a sole byproduct of his country. It's a product of the change his country is going through. And that's one of the things I tried to make the point of. The loss of the home, or the danger to the changes, or the danger brought by the changes to the old man in the sea, to the grouper, can't be sliced out and said, oh, it's just this one thing. It's a group of things all reflecting off each other. And that's what makes it so frustrating and difficult, is because you can't say, oh, here's a solution. It's a continuing roll of the dice that we have to deal with, or which in this case, the grouper has to deal with. And hopefully I wrote it in a way that the grouper's problem is reflective of Papa's problems, Papa, the narrator, that he is going through the same losses of home, or loss of home, that the grouper is, for much of the same reasons, for climate change, for corruption, for cultural theft, for economics. All of those things are coming together as a perfect storm to wipe out the home of Papa and of the grouper.
Yes, it is something that you really can't pull apart, and I agree with that, because you build a fancy hotel and Americans will come. You see that they're coming and you build another one.
And
meanwhile, what I find fascinating here is that they're building it on the beach, which is on sand. So that too is going to change.
That's the wonderful symbolism and fact that it's, life, we build our lives on shifting ground, and it's more easily seen when the water's rushing in and wiping out the sand from beneath your feet. But it's true, I think it's universal, true across the board. We just sometimes hold on to the delusion that, well, but my part of the world is permanent.
Yes.
And I was going to just add, I know Stephanie wants to jump in here, but I'm just going to add on the issue of building it and they will come. And that's again part of the paradox. And in real world, in our real world feelings, my wife and I struggled with that. We went to Mexico and loved the country, loved the culture, loved the people, loved the life there. And so we built, and ours was not a fancy hotel. Ours was a tiny thatch roofed bed and breakfast. $59 a night got you our best room. But even that added to the weight of the world rushing into this tiny little village. I mean, as our hotel got written up in travel magazines or won TripAdvisor awards, it caused more people to come, which created more demand. And in the 10 years that we lived there, we went from when we started our small little B&B, there was no hotel in town that was not a small thatched roof posada. When we sold our hotel, it was the last one of that type existing. All the others had been torn down in that 10-year period and replaced with glass and chrome and cement, and were now multi-stories high. And the beautiful view of the sea that you would see as you rode your bicycle down the dirt road was now blocked off by buildings, and the dirt road was now cement, and it was filled with cars. 10 years, that's all it took to happen. And it's not without some regret that we think, what did we add to that? You know, what was our contribution to the change that affected that place we loved? And I don't have an answer, but it's not an easy.
No, how did the local people respond to your being there? I'm just curious.
But before this complex answer, but I wanted to go to Stephanie because I know she had something to jump in and say.
Yes, you're right. Unmute, please.
I was going to ask you about Quarantia or Quarantia, however you pronounce it. And you talk about Quarantia, where you go next, the hope, the what's your desire? And
the Quarantia, is that
and the meaning of that? And also it's a kind of a Buddhist thing in a way too, because one of the you talk about this area, which I do know, not that particularly, but I do know the Caribbean and or the Caribbean. And I also was an expat in another country in Europe, and there is a certain similarity to everything. And bloom where you were planted could be lifted from the Dalai Lama in a sense as well. So I was wondering about the impact of Quarantia. I find it fascinating that they don't want to go home to Ireland or to where he came from, but to look for a new place, to create a new desire, a new home.
Well, and it's when I came across that concept of Quarantia, at that time when I lived in Mexico.
Excuse me, Tony, would you? Maybe not everyone knows what it means.
I'm going to explain. So,
okay.
Bullfighting was still very popular in Mexico. It's since been banned, but and at the time, as I began to look at the structure of the bullfight in an attempt to understand the cultural affection for it, there is a point in the bullfight where the bull, after he's been stabbed and hurt many times, will retreat to some area of the ring and just stand there. And that's called the Quarantia. It's his safe place. It's the place where he feels that he can heal up and he can have a moment to breathe and plan out what happens next. Now, of course, all this is conjecture. The poor animal is in shock at this point, but that is the understanding and the theme that's given to this part of the bullfight. And the idea is that the bull at this point knows that he's going to die. It's animal's instinct. He knows he's too injured to live. Everyone knows that the bull is going to die at this point. And yet the bull is taking a moment to decide how to live out the rest of his life. And in terms of Buddhist practice, our lives are impermanent. We are all constantly in a state of Quarantia, of this is it. I need a moment to breathe and heal up because I'm going to die, but I still have some time. I still have this moment now to deal with my life. And so I was so attracted to that, both as a Buddhist and in the concept of seeking home. I'm going to leave home. I'm going to run away from all these problems over here. Now I know those problems will find me again, or I'll have new problems, but I'm going to find a place that for a moment in space and time, I can breathe. And that's sort of the thing I was going. And again, it's, as you say, Stephanie, was the bloom where you're planted. Shunryu Suzuki, who was the founder of the San Francisco Zen Center, is I think generally considered one of the great Zen teachers of the last 20 years. Was always reprimanding people, saying, you're running around the world. We're going to the moon looking for something that we should be able to find within ourselves where we are right now. There's a great Zen poet, Gary Snyder, who also writes wonderfully about just stopping where you are and exploring the world around you. immediately around you, rather than going off to find something new. So there's that balance too. But that's backed up by the nature of even where you are, the blooming where you're planted. Where you're planted is going to wash away. It's something's going to happen that's going to take that away from you. It's all impermanent. So how do you find home in that?
You find it wherever you are at that moment, at that time. Isn't that why he's going to go to France to look, as opposed to go back to Ireland, which is the known?
Exactly. I hope that I ended the book on the note that home is found in the search for home.
I just want to point out, you have a really lovely passage in this story describing a bullfight from a human's view of what the bull might be feeling. And it's really a nice approach to it. I've seen some bullfights. I have mixed feelings about them, but I
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I step back from it, I understand some of the beauty of life and death in that ritual.
There is that, and that's seeing the bullfight. I saw a bullfight when I was young down in Tijuana, and I was horrified.
Mhm.
But seeing it through the eyes of my Mexican friends when I lived there, it was a different experience. That's not to say that I still wasn't horrified, and I applaud the concept that perhaps we should ban it. Perhaps as a people, Mexico needs to move beyond that. But there is a cultural importance in the ceremony. That's what the bullfight is. It's a ceremony. And so I'm with you. I have mixed feelings about it. But you had asked about how the locals reacted to changes in their home, particularly Americans coming down. That's multi-level. When my wife and I first moved to Mexico and settled in Playa del Carmen, it was fairly unknown. It was not a destination for weddings and vacations and big businesses. It was a little village. It really had one paved street. Everything else was dirt roads, and it was quiet and very sweet. And the people there were incredibly welcoming. They adopted us. They made us part of their families. And as I always, but the flip side of that is I always tell people still, if you're going to move to another country, don't move there as a foreigner. Move there to be part of that country. So if you go to live in Mexico and you're going to think you're going to live a life of permanent vacation, drinking margaritas and tipping the mariachi bands, that's not life. And so the willingness to accept the good and the bad of the country, I think, is what allowed us to move freely in the community. That being said, the first wave was followed by a second wave of Americans who weren't interested in how Mexico felt or how Mexicans lived. They were interested in having a good time on the beach. And the third wave were the predators who came in to make as much money as they could, often to steal it if necessary. Waves of, and by predators, I mean individuals and I mean corporations, so that they bought up all the land. And once that was done, that opened the way for, and so at that point, there began to be a real resentment among the locals for these people who had come in and taken over. You have to understand, in Mexico, you're entitled to a piece of land. It's a holdover from the revolution. Your piece of land may be on the other side of the country from you, but there's a couple acres of land that you can say, that's mine. And in the beach areas, large corporations have come in and said, we'll give you, $25,000 for that piece of beachfront property. And for people who live in a house with a tarp or a roof, that's a godsend. But it's unfair and it's theft. And so there was a growing resentment. Then you have the cartels, the large amount of monies being changing hands in this part of Mexico was an open invitation for the cartels to come in. And when I lived there, there was no cartel activity in that part of Mexico. Now the cartels own it. They run everything. My family and friends still down there tell me horror stories of how the cartels are running their lives now. So all of that's part of that change. So the welcoming nature of the locals was tested and in some cases broken. That's probably the best way to say it.
It sounds like it was broken by outsiders, foreigners, as well as Mexicans.
Absolutely. It's that combination. It was Mexico that invited. I'll tell you a very quick story. There was a massive hurricane that hit a small seaside village about 100 miles south of us when we were living there, we being my wife and I. And the expat community in Playa said, we need to help these people. I mean, they were totally wiped out. And so a local woman, a local Mexican woman was organizing assistance for the people down there. And the expat community really stepped up. And we began to do daily caravans of food and medicine and water and supplies back and forth, 3-hour trip down, 3-hour trip back every day to help, because these people were devastated. And we couldn't understand why no one else was helping. Why wasn't the government in helping these people? And then after we'd been doing this for a week or two, we were contacted by the government that said, and we had been on social media asking for donations, asking for help, and questioning why no one else was helping. And so the government representative came in and said, you people aren't citizens here, and we can easily deport you tomorrow. So here's the deal. You can continue to help, but you have to say that you're simply distributing donations that were given to you by the Mexican government. You can't say that it was given by someone else. And you have to take these stickers that say Mexican government on them and stick them on every package that you hand out of diapers or milk or water. And if you don't do that, we'll shut you down and we'll send you back to the States. And it took us a while to discover why that happened. The government had made a deal with a large cruise ship corporation to allow them to come in and develop a cruise ship port at where this village had been. But they couldn't do it unless the people who lived on the land abandoned it under Mexican law. And so the Mexican government was trying to force these people out of their homes and away from their land by simply not helping them get basic shelter and supplies. And eventually, of course, that's what happened. They left, and there's now a beautiful cruise ship port there.
I don't know how to respond to that. There's no way to.
I'm sorry, I should have been prepared to be a little more up.
No, that's okay. That's fine, because it really does work with the story. The way development comes in and just takes over. It does work with that.
That's part of the change that, do you fight change? Do you accept it? Do you roll with it? Do you move on? Those are the questions I hope I raised in the book.
You did. And I think toward the end of this, I don't know if both characters really know where they're going. Maybe Chaz does. He has a specific place, but the narrator is going to Key West, seeing what'll happen and it's not really a great place for him to go, or for the narrator to go. And it's going to be a tryout.
Yeah, and that's specific. I mean, you don't know whether Chaz is successful. You don't know whether he's going to find that restart to his life that he's hoping he'll find in France. I will tell you that the character that Chaz was based on disappeared. He made that journey back to that beach in France, and no one ever heard from him again. None of his friends, none of his family. No one knows if he died, if he went to jail, if no one knows whatever happened to him. And that was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so that's the unknown factor there. With Papa doesn't have a specific goal in mind, a specific journey to a specific place, because hopefully he's learned that he's his own home, that where he goes will be home, and it's that search that will be home to him. Yeah, Stephanie.
I'm confused. I thought he was going to see a woman in Key West. From
He
Chicago.
is.
So he's looking for a relationship, a new beginning, a new life, and all that.
Always a
As
possibility.
a person, he has a person to go to, where Chaz doesn't.
He may have a person to go to.
Yeah.
But you'll notice he also says, I might go to Thailand, I might go to Cuba, I might go here. And he also says, if I have this relationship with this woman, well, how great will that be to have someone to share the journey with? That'll be real home. But it's not a place. He's not saying I'm going to go to Key West and settle down and get married and run a souvenir shop. He's saying if someone wants to join me on the journey, that might be a blessing, but the journey's still there. At least that I hope that's the way I wrote it. You know, as an author, sometimes you write something and, I will show something to my wife and say, what do you think of this? And her feedback will be totally different than what I wanted. So as a writer, once you send it out into the world, it's up to the reader to decide what really happened.
What really happened, or sometimes I think it's what's meaningful to the reader. In this case, you do say that the narrative is back on the Margarita Road. To me, that's back on the path. And in that case, yeah, he could go to Thailand, Key West, wherever. The world is open. That's part of the freedom of that mindset.
I was just, for example, I was just down in a little place called Sayulita a couple months ago in Mexico, which is on the Pacific side. And it's an adorable little village built into hills bordering a small bay of the Pacific. And it's very sweet, and there's a strong sense of community. And there's a small but growing expat group down there. But already there's construction. Already there are permits for large hotels. Another 5 years, it won't be the sweet little village. And for me, that's part of the path also, is to know that there are still places like that. There are still slices of what I would call paradise out there that can be found and explored. And that's another reason for the journey, is to know that the world's a big place, and there are some beautiful places. I'm just learning to keep them secret now, or quiet.
I think that Chuck, you mentioned that about Seattle too. That a lot of, maybe you can explain, a lot of people thought that didn't know about Seattle.
Oh yeah. A lot of people, well, I'm an outsider from the Midwest. You're from the East Coast. We are all transplants, and we've come here because it's a beautiful place. But other people have come too and caused some problems. But I want to ask Tony a question. You've explained very well, for me, the influence of Buddha Dharma on your writing and on this particular piece that we read. In your bio, it says that you have also been a martial art instructor. And I have done the same myself. My system is Choi Fut. And I'm curious about what martial arts system did you teach? Do you still work out? And does that background impact or influence your martial art background, your writing?
Oh, you guys were supposed to ask simple questions, and I could say, here's what happened. Story. Yes, no, maybe. My martial arts has been eclectic. I started as a teenager studying traditional form of Japanese karate called Shito-ryu. I later spent years studying an American form of karate called Kimpo, and I eventually received black belt ranking in that art. I then began studying Brazilian jiu-jitsu with a Brazilian family called the Gracie family. And their art sort of became a revolution in martial arts. I worked with them for years and years and ran a program for them. And I also I studied a form called Jeet Kune Do, which was
That's Bruce Lee.
Which was an art form created by Bruce Lee. And I trained with a guy named Larry Hartzell, who had been a student of Bruce's. So martial arts has always been a big part of my life. But just the other day, and I wrote about this on my Facebook page, just the other day, I went and did a class with a guy named Dan Inosanto. Dan just turned 87.
Yeah.
He is a master fighter and teacher. He has teaching rank in a dozen different martial art styles. He was Bruce Lee's business and training partner while Bruce was alive.
He's a legend.
He is a legend. And what Dan talked about that day was that there was no perfect style, that there wasn't anything that you could say, oh, if I learn this, I'll be the best fighter, kicker, puncher. He said it's a matter of being open to everything. It's a matter of seeing what resonates and works for you. And everybody has a different body structure. Everybody has different capabilities, speed, skills, mental issues that affect how they practice something physical like the martial arts. And so Dan's thing has always been pick and choose, study as much as you can and take what works. And that's been my approach to practicing the Dharma also. I feel strongly, I've come to a point in my practice where I feel rigid commitment to a particular tempo or program or teaching doesn't work very well for me. So I have tried to throw off what some have called the wrapping paper of Zen and allow myself to practice from a standpoint of whatever works. And so I'm open to a number of teachers at this point that I have good relationships with, but none of whom I would allow to control my practice. In the end, just like in martial arts, what works for me as a spiritual path may not work for you. And so that's my approach, if that helps.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
It is. I'd like to open it up. There are a number of other people on this Zoom, and if anyone else would like to ask questions or make comments, you're all quiet. Okay.
I put them to sleep, I'm afraid.
No, I don't think so. I think they're just shy. But anyway, you had brought, this is a different topic. You had brought up Gary Schneider, and I'm just curious. there are a number of other writers in his generation. And I think I saw something with you talking about that. Would you like to say anything about that and your own experience with other writers during that previous time period?
Well, I know Gary not well, but
Mhm.
but he is a huge influence on my Buddhist practice and on the way he lives his life. If you don't know, long ago, Gary is 94 now, I believe. And long ago, he moved up into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains and built himself a home, and that's where he lived and has lived ever since. And he comes down from the mountains to deliver his books and read his poetry, and then goes back. And I guess the point is he walks the walk. He lives the life. He lives ethically in the manner that he thinks is best, and that's very hard to do. But so he's an inspiration, and I applaud him for that. He came out of that. He was discovered or started writing during the Beat era, but Gary's always made it clear he was not a Beat, although he had close ties and friends with among the Beats, Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, who was a particularly dear friend of his. He again, going back to that theme, he felt that putting a category on something as important as writing was a detriment. As soon as you did that, you had to follow certain limitations and guidelines and boundaries. And he didn't like that. So he always fought against the idea that he should be considered a beat writer. And I have another friend, Herbert Gold. Herb is 99, also wrote during the era, or he's written ever since. He's still writing, but he got his first wave of popularity during the era of the Beats. And again, made it clear that while he was close friends with a number of creative forces during that time, he would never allow himself to be limited by that title or that category. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, I think all too often, particularly writers, get into a rut. I mean, I've had authors who I just adore something they've written, but when they've written the same thing 4 times, I begin to think, it's time to explore a little bit for them and for me.
I agree with you. If you're going to be an artist, you have to have an open mind to your own work and to the life around you, to what's around you in your environment. You can't, if you're put in a category, I don't know how you create anything. You just can't.
I'll throw out a name. One of my favorite authors is Don Winslow, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with him. Winslow has been writing for a long time, and he's just announced that he's about to retire. He's finishing up his last couple books because he wants to devote himself to political change in America. He's a progressive, and so I like that. So that's my perspective. But Winslow has written just about every literary style that you can think of. He's written comedy and satire and genre mysteries and broken through and written moving historical novels. And as an artist, he's always changing. So I just find that very admirable. I will also say he wrote a trilogy about how the Mexican cartels came to rise to power and what it means for America. They're horrifying books. They're fictionalized accounts of actual happenings. And it's not for the timid. they're difficult stories to read, but it's a magnificent tribute to the people of Mexico that they survive what's going on with them. So, and so that's Don Winslow. He's worth checking out.
Okay, I'll take a look. I noticed that, are you working on a memoir? That would be different. You have produced fiction, and now you're doing something else.
My problem is I'm old.
That's not a problem.
The problem is I'm old with a bad heart. And if I had started writing when I was 40, like I had once wanted to, it might be a different situation. So right now I'm trying to cram in as much as I can. I've written several short pieces. Some have been published, some are still out in the world being considered. Most of them tend to be memoir-based pieces about ethical living. I have almost completed a memoir of my time in Mexico, not a repetition of Driftwood, but the actual difficulties of running a hotel in a land where you don't speak the language or understand the money. And I'm also, hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a new fiction novel. This one is a Victorian mystery exploring the growth of personal independence during the Industrial Revolution, and I'm having a great deal of fun with that book.
I like mysteries, so I have to keep in touch. Well, you're certainly doing what you had suggested before. You're branching out, doing different kinds of writing, and that's great. And it sounds like you're going to have a lot of work produced in the next couple of years.
I hope so. I will say, no one asked, and it's a question I always get when I do any sort of conversation or appearance or discussion. People say, well, if you loved Mexico so much, why did you come home? And I had a massive heart attack. My heart literally stopped. And healthcare in our little part of Mexico was limited. And so there was no 911, no ambulance service. I had to drive myself to the hospital. My wife was in the States caring for her mother who had dementia. And so by the time I got to the hospital, my heart had stopped. And luckily, a security guard dragged me into the emergency room, and they got me going again and packed me in ice and drove me an hour up to Cancun, where they had a hospital that could help. And the doctors there saved my life. But that after the, and again, it's never one thing, after that episode, because my heart was so badly damaged, it was recommended that I have certain treatments that were unavailable in Mexico. And at the same time, that we felt we should be near family, just in case something happened. And that was also at the time that we looked around and realized our little town had become something different, had changed into a vacation destination and was all shiny with new buildings, and it might not be our place anymore. And so that was part of our change as to what was home. And that was an interesting adventure, to return home and not have it be the same home. We'd lived in San Francisco, in the city itself, for 30 years, but we decided we wanted something quieter and greener. So we moved north into the hills of Marin. And it's been a experience establishing a new home, even though familiar.
Yes. Chuck, did you want to say something? I thought I saw, no, okay. So you have various levels. You have a lot of levels there. You have personal, you have what was going on in the environment, in the place where you were living, and you have your new career. So there are a lot of levels going on in your life, and That's going to be in the memoir?
That will be in the memoir, but I have to say and it's in the memoir because I think people identify. We all have
Yes.
multiple levels. We don't like to, I mean, sometimes it really works for me, and I know for other people, to sort of limit yourself to a couple levels for a while. Maybe I'm just going to focus on this part of my life. But all of us have all of those ranges that we drift through is on our journey. And I think that's why your book, my book, the idea of change strikes people, you know.
Other?
Yes, I have this question, Tony, especially after heard your survival story, and you survived. So make me think whether the concept of home is not a rigid concept. It's changing. It's impermanent. And your book, Driftwood, like a piece of driftwood keeps drifting. Is that more embedded in the young age, or in what is it? Kind of background noise. Is that more embedded or in agreement with the young people who keep searching because their lifestyle, they want to know what is going on in the other part of the world, whereas now you're settled down back in the US in northern San Francisco, and you're using the word getting old.
Excuse me, Donna, if you can hear me, would you please mute yourself?
I don't know where the noise comes from.
I think Donna is having a conversation, and it's hard. Well, continue. Maybe if you can.
Hello, can anybody mute yourself?
Donna,
What?
would you please mute yourself?
I'm sorry, I was upstairs, missed it. I think I was on mute, and I don't know, when I'm on mute, it says no mute.
No mute.
It's okay. I'll
There you
Okay, that's fine.
Ava, I got the idea of the drift.
Right. A long question makes me take time to set it up. So you got it. It's,
You know, for me, that's a particularly poignant because I always felt that, my youth is slipping away. I need to get out and live my life. And it's funny, I was talking, my son is 40 now. And not long ago, he was saying, the best of my life is behind me. And I had that same attitude at his age and younger. But, and I think many people do say, well, now that I'm middle-aged or older, I should just relax. I should retire. I should, enjoy the grandkids or sit on the porch or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's happening because you feel you should do that, not because you want to do that, then that's sad to me. I think that, and part of this is, again, my Buddhist training, change happens constantly. Impermanence is an instantaneous event. Nothing lasts. And so the person who is 60 is not the same person who was 40. And the person who is 90 is not the same person who was 70. We are always changing, hopefully evolving, hopefully for the better. But regardless, the world changes us. And so to realize that, to be aware of that, is a task as we get older, because we want to say, didn't I earn the right to sit around and have things be all right for a while? No, we didn't. And once you accept that, for me, my attitude is, once you accept that life is always going to change and it's always going to throw new things at you, well, then there's that sense of adventure and the enjoyment of the journey that comes rushing in. And I find it to be as fresh at 73 as I did at 23. So, and again, that's part of my storytelling, is to tell that story of you don't have to quit because you get to a certain point in life. I mean, I wrote my first book at 70. I quit my job as an attorney and moved to Mexico at 55. You know, there is no limit on the journey. It's just how much you want to enjoy it. I don't know if that answered your question, but that was sort of what it triggered in my mind.
It does, and I admire you, and I envy as well. It takes a huge courage to change your lifestyle. And I'm an attorney, practicing attorney, and I enjoy writing and I enjoy reading, and I find myself in a constant tension with my surroundings, with the job, with politics, with AI, so it's hard to keep or realize your own existence in terms of Buddhism, the world that you live in serenity, you not reclusive, but you aloof, no, how to say that? But bottom line, how to adapt, how to maintain your own philosophy, your ethics, but at the meantime, you're not left behind completely.
That's the key, isn't it? You want to live an ethical life, and an ethical life means recognizing change in the world. It's Sharyn's wonderful book and my contribution to it. But at the same time, you have to live in the society where you currently exist. And for us, that means having a job. That means making money. That means actually complying with the requirements that at least the basic requirements that society places upon us. And finding that balance point where we can live with ourselves and live with society is a lifetime struggle. But that's worth doing. And particularly being an attorney, part of the practice of being an attorney is having your whole outlook on life and your ability to think restructured in law school. And seriously, you walk out of there with a different, as my wife always says, don't be a lawyer around me. And so it's even once you've had that kind of severe training, it makes the task of finding that balance point more difficult. So, bows to you for trying. I always say now that I'm a recovering attorney, and that's sort of my attitude.
Tony, why is the training of a attorney severe? Why is that?
Again, multiple reasons. One is because the nature of the law is to be a perfection above and beyond our natural human instincts of anger and revenge and jealousy and greed. The law is supposed to be a way to control those and manage those and help us live together without crossing each other's boundaries. And in order to do that, the people who administer the law, have to be trained in a concept that doesn't allow them to give in to their own basic attitudes or the influence of other basic feelings like greed and anger and revenge and so forth. So that's one reason I think it has to be severe. Another is greed and exclusivity. The legal practice that has emerged, at least I can only talk to America, is a business. it's not a calling anymore. It's, if it ever was, it's a business. And so the growth of that industry, of the legal industry, requires it to protect itself, to not be picked away at by other social influences, so that it can maintain its status, and by maintaining its status, maintains its monetary influx. And so there's a real thing of, we're rigid about this. We're going to keep this club an exclusive club. And the longer we can stay exclusive, the more money we're all going to make. I know that sounds very crude, but I truly believe there's an element of that in it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone else have a question or a comment before we close this event? No?
Well,
Is there anything you would like to say, Tony?
I just want to thank you all. This has been delightful. I know I rambled on. That's the lawyer in me. Once you get talking, you can't stop. And I apologize if I've rattled on too much, but for me, it's been a delight. And it's nice to talk with people who have an understanding of what I was trying to write about. And Sharyn, of course, thank you for picking one of my stories to be in that wonderful
Oh, I'm very honored to have it. It's a very good story.
So thank you all. It's been a very enjoyable morning for me.
Okay,
And
thank you.
Here.
Thank you.
For coming to talk to us.
Yes,
Yes,
thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. And it took me back to the Caribbean, even though it's a different place. But I could even smell
On
the
to
air.
Paris.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay,
very welcome.
Thanks, Sharyn.
okay, thank you. Thank you,
Goodbye, all.
Stacy.
Bye. Thanks.
Sharyn,
Tony.
I'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Oh, now I see it, Patricia. Stacy? She's not there anymore. Stacy?